Morning everyone, my name is Dr. David Boye and I'm here to give a lecture on the microenvironmental strategic analysis using the industry attractiveness analysis framework. Alright, this is the content of what we'll be discussing today in this presentation, and to start off I'll give a brief description about myself. So I have an educational background in economics, finance, and a PhD in strategy, enterprise, and innovation. My PhD thesis looked into the integrated perspective and analysis for crowdsourcing science and innovation, which is a subset of open innovation and outsourcing. Right? My research interest, academic fields of involvement stretch beyond these areas, but they kind of circle down into these three areas, which is innovation management, entrepreneurship, and engineering. Now, let's start off the lecture. So when we look at the business environment, we can actually divide the business environment into two key areas, which is the micro environment and as well as the macro environment. Now, when we look into in depth into these environments, we can see that the macro environment is kind of generally just a description of the different external influences such as political factors, economic factors, social factors, legal factors, as well as technological factors can actually influence any organization's operations. Now, when you look at the microenvironment, they are kind of internal aspects, which is customers, competitors, suppliers, and the general public or stakeholders. Now, when you're performing a strategic analysis for the microenvironment, you don't necessarily start off with the microenvironment. You kind of look into three areas, which is the microenvironment, industry, and as well as the internal environment, which is the microenvironment. But for this lecture, we mainly focus on the micro. Okay, so while we're doing a microenvironment analysis, this is generally just to identify the business's value propositions, which are generally the core competencies, competitive advantage, which allows a business to kind of thrive in any market. And when you're looking into this, there are three different characteristics which define these, which is aspects that any organization is better than its competitors, the products which the organization offers which are hard to replicate, and as well as aspects of the product which any customer values. Now, when you're looking at the industry attractiveness analysis framework to define the attractiveness of a market, there are many frameworks which can actually be used, which we can actually use a SWOT analysis, game plan, value chain model, PESTEL model, and the strategic group analysis. And for this lecture, which is most appropriate, is the Porter's 5 forces model for competitive analysis, which is generally an illustration of how 5 competitive forces can be used to explain the attractiveness and viable entries to an industry. Now, to give more in-depth explanation of how this model is going to be used, we'll first talk about how the rivalry among existing industry competitors can be described. This is generally the main drivers is the number and capability of competitors in the market. I mean, if there are many competitors offering undifferentiated products and services, this generally reduces the market attractiveness. Another aspect, which is the suppliers aspect, you can give an assessment of how easy it is for suppliers to drive up prices. This is generally determined by the numbers of suppliers for existing elements, uniqueness of products or services, and the relatively size or strength of suppliers. Now, when you're looking at the potential entrance aspects, this is kind of covers the aspects which in turn reduces profitability. I mean, unless existing players have strong and durable barriers to entry, for example, patents, economies of scale, these generally, if they are not in place, this will actually reduce the profitability in a competitive rate. Now, when you're looking at the buyers aspect, this is an assessment of how easy it is for buyers to drive prices down. This is determined by the numbers of buyers in markets, the importance of each individual to businesses, and in generally, if the business has just fewer potential buyers or powerful buyers, they are often an indication of how prices can actually be influenced. And when you look at the substitute aspect, this actually deals with the substitute products that are actually existing in the market. Now, where there are close substitute products existing in markets, it increases the likelihood of customers to switch to alternative products in response to price increase. And this generally reduces the power of suppliers and attractiveness of markets. Now moving on to the next slide, there are actually different criteria to measure these different forces which we described earlier on in the slides. And when you look at this, these forces kind of determine the industry profitability because they influence the prices, the cost, and the required investment of firms in industry. Now, we're going to give a brief case study of a very vibrant company, which is Costa Group Holdings Limited. And this is actually a food and beverage and tobacco. This is actually in the food, beverage, and tobacco sector which they operate. And generally, when we look at the first force, which is defined by Porters, you can see that when a new product or service meets similar customer needs in different ways, the industry profitability suffers. For example, services like Dropbox and Google Drive are substitutes to storage hardware drives. The threat of substitute products or services is high if it offers the value proposition that is uniquely different from present offerings of the industry. So in the case of Costa Group Holdings, how are they going to be able to combat these? Some key aspects they can actually do is by being a service-oriented rather than a product-oriented company. They can also do this by understanding the core need of customers rather than what the customers are buying. And in itself, this can actually raise the switching cost by working on loyalty. Costa Group Holdings Limited can also improve the quality, maximize value for money, and set strong differentiation basis to discourage customers from using substitute products. Now we look at the next force, which is the bargaining power of suppliers. Now, almost all companies in the food and beverage industry buy their raw materials from numerous suppliers. Suppliers in dominant positions can increase the margins and can earn in the market. Powerful suppliers in this sector use their negotiating power to extract higher prices from the firm in this field. The overall impact of high supplier bargaining power is that it lowers the overall profitability in the sector. Now, in terms of Costa, how can they actually address this? They can address this by strengthening their position against suppliers by decreasing their dependence on one or few suppliers, and generally also building an efficient supply chain with multiple suppliers. This in itself will increase or influence price sensitivity. They can also develop long-term contractual relationships with suppliers from different regions. This not only lowers their bargaining power, but also allows Costa to actually improve its supply chain efficiency. By experimenting with also product designs using different materials, this can actually influence the price they can actually demand for their products, such as if the prices go up for one raw material, then the company can actually shift to another material. Now, we move on to another force, which is actually the degree of rivalry among competitors. Now, if the rivalry among existing players in an industry is intense, then it will drive down the prices and decrease the overall profitability in the industry. Costa, for example, operates in a very competitive industry. This competition does take a toll on the overall long-term profitability of the organization. Now, how can they actually address this? They can address this by building a sustainable differentiation. They can deal with this by also building a scale so that it can compete better. And they can also do this by collaborating with their existing competitors to increase the market size rather than just competing for small market share. Another aspect, it deals with the threats or barriers to entrance. Now, new entrants in this sector always bring on new innovations. They bring on new ways of doing things and can also put pressure on Costa. Now, providing some sort of value proposition to their customers would be the real aim for Costa, and in itself, they can actually build up effective barriers that safeguard their competitive advantage. Now, how can Costa actually do this? They can do this by innovating in ways by bringing new products. New products not only would bring new customers to the fold, but also give old customers a reason to stay with Costa. They can also do this by building an economy of scale so that it can lower the fixed cost per unit. They can also do this by developing brand loyalty, which is an area which I touched on in the third key point. But they can do this by working on customer relationships. This in its way can raise psychological switching costs, which customers can have. It can also develop long-term contractual relationships with its distributors to widen access to target markets. And lastly, they can also be building capacities and spending money on research and development to get valuable customer data. This in itself will give them an edge on how their customers relate to their products and services, and actually they can develop new ways to ensure that customers are satisfied with their products and not looking elsewhere. Now, another aspect, which is the bargaining power of buyers, and this is generally described as, buyers are often demanding a lot. They want to buy the best offering available products by paying the minimum price as possible. This kind of puts pressure on companies such as Costa, and in the long run, it kind of puts pressure on their profitability. So the smaller and more powerful the customer base is for Costa, the higher the bargaining power of their customers, and the higher their ability to seek increasing discounts and offers. So how can Costa actually address this? They can do this by building and diversifying their customer base. This will actually reduce the bargaining power of buyers, plus it will provide an opportunity for firms to streamline its sales and production process. They can also do this by building loyalty, by embedding innovation and offering excellent customer experience, which can raise the switching cost, which eventually will ultimately reduce buyers' bargaining power. And to conclude this, by analyzing all 5 competitive forces, Costa Holding Limited strategies can gain a complete picture of what impacts the profitability of the organization in the industry. They can use this to identify game-changing trends early on and can swiftly respond to exploit the emerging opportunities. By understanding Porter's 5 forces in great detail, this company, which we just looked into, can shape these 5 forces in their favor. The general conclusion is, most will consider the Porter's 5 forces model as a starting point, which can actually be used in combination with other models such as personal and value chain. And this will give a better understanding of the external environment, as I mentioned in the slides where you're actually going to be performing a strategic analysis involving the macro environment, industry environment, and the micro environment, which we've just touched on now. And for great exercise for you guys, I could say you could also do this by performing or choosing a particular company and perform a strategic analysis using the industry attractiveness analysis framework to identify attractive markets. These are the references used in this study. If you have any questions, do let me know. Thank you for listening.